Hey everyone, so the title of this video is How to Smash Achievement Standard 3.1 in Economics, which is Efficiency of Market Equilibrium. So to answer the exam questions Achievement Standard, you have to be very specific with your language, so make sure you pay attention to the specific terminology as we go through this. The reason I say How to Smash Achievement Standard 3.1 is it's pretty predictable. They ask the same sort of questions every time, and your answers can follow a certain pattern so that you maximize your chances of getting a nice high grade. So here are the things you need to know. Number one, how do market forces, remember market forces are just this demand and supply, consumers and producers, that's what they mean when they say market forces. How do they lead to changes in equilibrium price and quantity when something in the market changes? They always ask this question somewhere in the paper every year. It's worth an achieved merit. You've just got to know it. You've got to practice it. There's only really two ways to answer it. So like I said, pretty predictable. We'll go through that in a minute. You need to understand what producer surplus is and what consumer surplus is and what they look like on a graph and what deadweight loss is as well. Okay? You need to be able to calculate the areas of consumer surplus and producer surplus and deadweight loss. Once you know how to find them on the graph, you should be able to work out how to calculate them, because it's just either the area of a triangle or the area of a rectangle, or possibly a combination of both depending on what you're looking at. And the other thing they often ask is how to find the change in consumer or producer surplus after there's been a change in the equilibrium. So either the whole area, consumer and producer surplus, or the change between the before and after. So make sure you know how to do those things. Most importantly though, every single question you answer needs to look at these two things. It's going to ask you something about changes in consumer surplus and something about changes in producer surplus, and you always answer it in terms of what's happened to the price relative to the demand curve or the supply curve, depending on whether you're looking at producers or consumers. Has it the change in price made it the difference smaller or bigger? Bigger is good, smaller is bad. That's really important. Price, and then what's happened to the quantity. Basically, the more of something that's being consumed or produced, the bigger the surplus, and the smaller the quantity being consumed or produced, the smaller the surplus. You need to talk about both, not just one. Okay, so next, you need to be able to do that. Then the focus of the standard generally is on government intervention. They pretty much only ever ask about these things here: a tax, and by tax I mean an indirect tax on a particular good, a subsidy, a minimum price, a maximum price, a quota. I'm not going to go through what all those mean. You should know those, or if you don't, you need to find out. So for each of these, how do we show them on a graph, including finding the area of tax revenue or the total cost of a subsidy? How do they affect consumer surplus and producer surplus and deadweight loss? So for me, I would just practice every single graph. There's only 5 there. Practice them. Practice drawing them. Practice drawing the change. Practice finding the new consumer and producer surplus. Practice finding the deadweight loss, and so on. Sometimes they reverse it and talk about taking away those government interventions. That's fine. In a lot of ways, the key thing you remember is as soon as the government intervenes with any of these things, there's going to be a deadweight loss. And if they take away any of these things, so if they remove a tax or something like that, then the deadweight loss goes away and the market becomes allocatively efficient. So it's pretty much one or the other. Again, you need to be able to calculate the areas, including the area of tax revenue or subsidy cost. And the thing for me that does make things slightly tricky is, and it's not just for taxes and subsidies, they can ask it for anything, what if is the difference if a product has elastic demand or inelastic demand? So I'm not going to go into all that. You need to know the factors that affect how elastic demand is for a different product. And after that, really, they usually give you the graphs, and you can just follow the graphs. What's happened to consumer surplus? What's happened to producer surplus in a market with elastic demand or inelastic demand? I guess they could ask one with inelastic or elastic supply, but has yet to come up in NCA. Right, so let's talk about how to explain these changes. Now, this particular example I'm giving you is based around an imposition of a tax, but you can kind of use this formula for every single government intervention, which is why I say it's quite predictable. So, what do they want? So there's been a change. There's been one of these government interventions, a tax, a subsidy, a minimum price, a maximum price, a quota. So as a result, what's happened to the market price? So for example, you've got a graph, it's gone from D to B. The D to B is just whatever's off on the graph that you've been given. Consequently, what's happened to consumer surplus? Has it got bigger or smaller? So in this example, it's gone from DEA to ABC, and it's decreased because of the tax. Tip 1 or tip 5, one of those, you must use the areas on the graph. There's no point saying consumer surplus has decreased because prices increased and quantity demanded has decreased. You got to use whatever has been shown on the graph. If you're given calculations, use the numbers in your explanation. If you're given letters, use the letters. If you're given, I don't know, shaded areas, use the shaded areas. They are looking for you to be specific about connecting your explanation to the graph, not just general. Okay, so in this case, consumer surplus is decreased, loss of area BDEC. So you don't even need to really understand this fully. Just refer to the areas that have been lost or gained, depending on which sort of market intervention the government has done. Our quantity demanded has decreased from Q1 to Q2. So this is not enough. Okay, it's maybe enough for achieved. You need to go into more detail, just like I've said, around what's happened to the price and the quantity. So, for example, if there's been an increase in price, it means the difference between the price consumers are paying and the price they're prepared to pay is less, which reduces consumer surplus. Okay, you can use that formula. If the price went down, then you just flip that explanation around. The gap's getting bigger. So what's happened to the difference between the price and the amount consumers were prepared to pay, which is the demand curve. Okay, so the decrease at the same time, we need to refer to quantity as well. So in this case, if there's a decrease in quantity, consumers are buying less, there are fewer units to gain consumer surplus with. In total, that means that consumer surplus goes down or up, depending on what you're doing. Okay, so but you can use that formula. You've got to mention price, you've got to mention quantity, you've got to mention it in comparison to where consumers are. For producer surplus, what's happened to that? So you could just say the producer surplus has decreased. You can read it for yourselves. As I said, this example is taken from a tax. That is not enough for merit, okay? Because you need to go into more detail. So why has producer surplus decreased? It's decreased because the price has gone down for producers, and the difference between the price they receive and the price they were prepared to accept, which is the supply curve or the marginal cost curve, has reduced. So producer surplus goes down. Obviously, it's the reverse if price went up for producers. Quantity went down in this case, so they're selling less units, and so they've got less units to gain surplus from. Okay, you've just got to use that formula, and that'll get you from achieved to merit most of the time. The one additional aspect that could be in there, so we've got market equilibrium, we've got government interventions. The other one is international trade and allocator efficiency. So basically, this is usually tariffs. Okay, tariffs being put on or tariffs being taken off. Tariffs create a deadweight loss. Again, there's a government intervention, so there's a deadweight loss. It's a bit of a weird graph, so you'd need to practice that one over and over again until you get the deadweight loss area right. You do need to be able to calculate the areas as always. Again, it's just rectangles and triangles once you can find those areas on the graph. You also need to be able to, for exported goods, explain how the world price for exported goods affect the market, and be able to find those things. Again, when you're doing your explanation, what's happened to the price for producers or consumers, what's happened to the quantity, it all comes back to that. So some examples, I guess. As I said, there's always a question about some sort of market change and what happens to consumer or producer surplus, how does it get to market equilibrium? And from, for example, in this case, from PE QE to P1 Q1. And it's always the same. It's just a pattern, right? Okay, so if the price didn't change, if the price stuck at PE, so supply in this case has decreased, but it doesn't matter what the change is. There's been a change. If the price didn't change, what's the result going to be? In this case, there is a shortage. Okay, because supply now will be, or the quantity supplied now will be less than the quantity demanded, which is QE. Okay, it's either going to be a shortage or a surplus. That's it. There are only two. It's binary. There's only two possibilities. So let's know this answer off by heart. So there's going to be a shortage. That means consumers are going to bid up the price until we get to P1. You need to, in this case, talk about quantity supplied. So quantity supplied will decrease as the price goes up. Sorry, increase as the price goes up. You need a reason because it becomes more profitable. In this case, because as the price goes up, the quantity demanded will decrease. Why? Because it becomes less affordable. So you need a reason for those changes to get your merit. Okay, so there's a little model answer here, and you can just follow this. What happens if the price stays at the original equilibrium price? Is there a shortage or a surplus? Make sure you say because the quantity supplied is whatever and the quantity demanded is whatever. So that's your first point. And then your second point, in this case, there was a surplus, so producers will sell off their surplus stock to get rid of the surplus. What's going to happen to quantity demanded? What is going to happen to quantity supplied until the equilibrium is reached and demand and supply are equal. That's it. Okay, you can use that formula, those two bullet points, and that should pretty much guarantee you a merit. Okay, you just got to practice it on your graphs. A couple of examples now. So tax comes up a lot. Okay, so here's a tax graph. Okay, you've got to be able to find your new area of tax. Sorry, your new area of consumer surplus. So that would be here. Okay, and your new area of producer surplus would be here. I'm not going into detail around this. You've just got to practice it. Okay, so here's our very wobbly producer and consumer surplus and deadweight loss. In your answer, you're going to be referring to consumer surplus has changed from area 1, 2, 3, 4 to area 1. Producer surplus has changed from area 5, 6, 7 to area, 5, 6, 7, 8 to area 8. Okay, there's been a loss, a deadweight loss of 4 and 7. Okay, and obviously all this area in here is tax revenue. Use whatever information is on the graph in your explanation. Okay, what about a minimum price? So one thing with minimum prices and maximum prices, the quantity here is all that matters. Okay, it doesn't matter that people want, in this case it's a minimum price, it doesn't matter that producers want this price out here, want this quantity out here. All that matters is the fact that consumers will only buy this much in this case. Okay, so that's the only quantity that matters. Everything else is redundant after that. Producers will only sell this much, consumers will only buy that much. So consumer surplus is up here and producer surplus is here. So here's the next tip. Okay, this producer surplus area is weird. It's a weird shape. So if you were calculating it, you need to break it down into a rectangle. That's not going to work. Into a rectangle plus a triangle here. All right. They do like you to explain everything on the graph. So in this case, producer surplus, they lost this area here, but they gained this area up here. So you literally say that in your answer. Consumer surplus lost this area here and here, and it left with this little area here. So you can refer to the changes directly off the graph. Don't go into too much detail about the reason. You can just say this area has been lost, this area has been gained. Overall, in this case, producer surplus is being increased, even though they did lose some producer surplus over here because of the minimum price. Okay, hopefully that's going to give you some tips on how to smash out this standard.